Okay, folks, we're really getting towards the end now of this series of videos on Macbeth. Let's get into Act 4, Scenes 2 and 3. You'll see here that I haven't got any quotes written down from Act 4, although Scene 2, although I do, certain things always stay with you. I think I was teaching this play somewhere around 2003, 2004 in another school, in the Institute of Education, and I remember doing this scene, and just the crack in the class was mighty. We had great laughter, even though it's a scene in which, you know, children and a woman get killed. So it's horrific, but just there was a line, "You egg," and it just brings me back and reminds me how long I'm doing this stuff. But look, Act 4, Scene 2 is no laughing matter. It is, if you want a symbol in the play of Macbeth, of the horror that happens when a usurper steals the throne, when the natural order is disrupted. If you want a symbol in the play that represents just how bad Macbeth has become, refer to Act 4, Scene 2. It's the scene which features the massacre of the Macduff clan. Remember, at the end of the previous scene, he heard that Macduff had gone to England to help Malcolm, so he decides to punish him by slaughtering his family. It is somewhat melodramatic. Macduff's wife is seen despairing at the fact that her husband has abandoned her. By the way, just to say again, you know, when you watch these videos, there's going to be opportunity to feed back to me and ask questions, and it's going to be brilliant, this platform. But like, if you ever want me just to sit down and read any of these scenes, just to read them, I'm happy to do that and record myself doing it. So Macduff, he has made a decision that his country comes before his family. He knows that Macbeth's going to be angry if he goes to Malcolm, but I think Macduff underestimates Macbeth. I think he doesn't really get that Macbeth is capable of slaughtering a family, because Macduff is an honourable man, and despite the fact he knows Macbeth is dishonourable, he doesn't really understand quite how low Macbeth is willing to go. So he leaves his family unprotected, and he makes this personal sacrifice because he wants to go and help Malcolm, because he wants to help Scotland. We know that the real importance of this scene is to show in graphic detail the degree of barbarity to which Scotland has plummeted under Macbeth's rule. So when we see, you know, Macduff's wife being killed, when we see the egg being cracked, when we see Macduff's young son, and by the way, again, Macbeth tried to kill Fleance and didn't succeed. He does succeed in having Macduff's son killed. Later in Act 5, he kills a character called Young Seward, who is an unrough youth, which means he's too young to grow a beard, which means he's a child. And we'll see in the next scene images of the suffering of children as well. So that's an important symbol in the play, and it's another reason why you can refer to this. It's a symbol of Macbeth's corruption, of how far from a hero he is by the end of the play. So that's that scene. And then we get into the third scene of Act 4, which I think is one of my favourite scenes in the play. It doesn't feature, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee, apologies. It doesn't feature Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. In fact, Lady Macbeth hasn't featured in the play in a long time because, you know, of course, there's that idea. We'll see this when we look at Act 5, Scene 1. But that idea that, you know, her role in the play is important while she's important to her husband. When her importance to her husband diminishes, her role in the play diminishes, because the play's not about her, it's about him. Anyway, so this scene is all about Malcolm and Macduff. But more than that, it's about the description of what happens to a nation when the natural order is disrupted and somebody goes against God's will. Now, it's the only scene in the play that's set outside Scotland, set in England, where Malcolm has been given refuge. And really, Shakespeare uses this scene to kind of establish for the audience that Malcolm's going to be... Because the play has to end with the end of Macbeth as king, because you have to have a restoration of order in one of these tragedies. It's part of the rules of writing an Elizabethan tragedy. But Shakespeare's using this scene, I suppose, as well, to illustrate for the audience that, yeah, when Macbeth is gone and Malcolm takes over, because he is the Prince of Cumberland, don't forget, he'll do a good job. He's suited to the position of king. So it takes place in England, as I said, at King Edward's palace. I'm actually going to just go through this through the quotes. And it's this conversation between Malcolm and Macduff. But essentially, Malcolm tests Macduff. He tells Macduff, you know, that he's a corrupt man, because he wants to see, will Macduff... He doesn't trust anybody, Malcolm, and he's wise not to, because Macbeth as the king is capable of of doing anything and taking any strategy. So what Malcolm essentially says to Macduff is, I'm a very bad man. I'm worse than Macbeth. And what he's testing is Macduff pretending to be loyal? Because if he's pretending, then there's nothing that Malcolm can say that will make Macduff say, well, I'm not going to support you anymore. And he's testing whether or not Macduff is actually there because he loves not Malcolm, but Scotland. So when Malcolm pretends to be corrupt here in this scene, he's testing Macduff's virtue. And of course, Macduff passes with flying colours. Let's have a quick look at the key quotes from the scene. You can read that, that summary yourselves. Look at the description of life in Scotland here. And I mentioned earlier, when talking about Act 4, Scene 2, the death of children. Just look at this. Let's look at this. This is a description by Macduff of what life is like in Scotland under King Macbeth. Again, this play is just so rich with easy to remember quotes. Each new morn, new widows howl, new orphans cry, new sorrows strike heaven in the face. Absolutely magnificent language. It's a triad, if you want to talk about language. So there's 3 images that really pop off the page. We have the onomatopoeia of howl. So a howl of grief, of despair. We have the personification of somebody slapping God in the face. So Macbeth's crimes are a terrible insult to God. And then we have the image of crying children. So every morning, women wake up to find their husbands have been murdered. Children wake up to find their fathers have been killed. And these crimes, this unrelenting, tyranny is offensive to God. Again, a brilliant quote, a brilliant example of Shakespeare's use of language, a brilliant example of Shakespeare's ability to provoke the senses, to create really striking imagery, and also a really clear insight into Macbeth's failings as king. I love Malcolm's response. The language here is extraordinary again, and the condemnation of Macbeth is brilliant, but it's the language that always gets me. He says that Macbeth is a tyrant whose sole name blisters our tongues. So that's a reference to a disease. So one of the manifestations of a disease might be blistering. So Macbeth is a disease in the body of Scotland, and until it's excised, then Scotland can't prosper. And he says to Macduff, now, Macduff, I don't know if I can trust you, because Macbeth was once thought honest. See the way he's learned the lessons from his father. His father called Macbeth his peerless kinsman, brave Macbeth. This is Malcolm showing us as an audience that he's not a weak kid who doesn't understand the tough world of experienced and ruthless politicians and killers and warriors. He's wise. He's learned, to reserve judgment. And then he says, describing Scotland, I think our country sinks beneath the yoke. It weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wounds. And again, you see the lovely triad, weeps, bleeds, and a gash is added to her wounds. It's a lovely example of what we call personification. So the whole country of Scotland is kind of turned into this female figure who has been enslaved. The yoke is an instrument of suppression, an instrument of slavery. It's like a wooden instrument that's your head is put in and your arms are put in it, so it restricts your movement. It restricts your freedom. It causes you to suffer. So Macbeth has put the entire nation in the yoke, has enslaved the whole nation, and then is sadistically torturing the nation, making it cry, making it bleed, opening new wounds, new gashes in the nation. So this is an incredibly vivid and damning description of life under King Macbeth. But there is hope, because Malcolm tells us that from gracious England have I offer of goodly thousands. And again, it's just interesting that he says gracious England, because of course that's a reference, that's not a throwaway adjective. That's a reference to the belief that the King of England, who was Edward the Confessor, was the real King of England during this period of history. That king has been picked by God, and that because he's a good man, he's helping Malcolm do God's work, which is to save Scotland from Macbeth. So there's hope. Malcolm has an army, and that army is hopefully going to go back to Scotland and depose the tyrant. Macduff talks about Macbeth and the contrast between the description of Macbeth at the start of the play, the great hero of Scotland, who carved his passage till he faced the slave and ne'er shook hands with him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chops and fixed his head upon our battlements. Oh, brave Macbeth, well, he deserves that name. Remember that the glorious hero? Well, now you have this description of him, not in all the legions of horrid hell can come a devil more damned in evils to top Macbeth. So that's how dreadful Macbeth is. He's regarded as worse than any devil that hell can produce. So again, really, really, really vivid imagery capturing the degree to which he's fallen in the regard of the people. Then we have this wonderful speech by Malcolm, which is an example of how in the play, this is a play where often deception, appearance versus reality. You may remember in a previous video I mentioned the word equivocation, which is when you tell the truth but you make it look like something else, you dress it up as something it's not. But this is an example of how deceit or deception can be used in a benevolent way. Like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth pretend to be loyal so they can kill the king. You know, Macbeth pretends to mourn the king the next morning, pretends he killed the guards to outrage. We know there's lots of the witches, they use deception. There's lots of lying that goes on. But here Malcolm is using, he's a grown-up. He understands that he can't just trust Macduff, he has to test him. So he lies to him and he says, look, I know Macbeth's bad, but I'm worse. I'm going to read this because it's just a brilliantly clever speech. He says, I grant him bloody, luxurious, avaricious, false, deceitful, sudden, malicious, smacking of every sin that has a name. Gorgeous. Sorry. Smacking of every sin that has a name. That's Macbeth. Oh. But then he says, but there's no bottom, none in my voluptuousness. He said, but I'm worse than him because I love sex and I can't get enough of it. Now, again, it's hilarious to listen to it. But anyway, he says, your wives, your daughters, your matrons and your maids could not fill up the cistern of my lust. The imagery, again, very straight. He says, if I was king, I'd use my power to sleep with whatever woman I wanted to. No woman would be safe. Now, of course, this is just a really simple quote to learn. The imagery of the cistern, which is where feces and waste goes. He's talking about lust as disgusting. He's saying I'm a sinner. But what he's doing is he's testing Macduff. He's not really like that. He's seeing how far Macduff will go in accepting a flawed king. In other words, he's testing, is Macduff loyal to Scotland, or is he pretending to be loyal to Malcolm so he can trap Malcolm? Malcolm, when Macduff despairs and says, oh, well, forget this, Scotland is doomed if you're this corrupt and, I don't know what to do. Malcolm then drops the side, says, no, look, I was lying, I was testing you, I'm all right. The king becoming graces, justice, verity, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, loneliness. I have them. This is where Macduff despairs, and Malcolm then says, look, no, I was only messing. I am yet unknown to woman. Never was forsworn. Scarcely have coveted what was my own. At no time broke my faith. Would not betray the devil to his fellow, and delight no less in truth than life. So he says, I'm terrible, I'm greedy, I'd steal all their money, I'd sleep with all the women, I'd be an awful king. Macduff says, oh no, this is terrible. And he says, I have none of the qualities that a king should have. I'm not, just, I'm not truthful. That's what verity means. I'm not measured in my appetites. That's what temperance means. I'm not stable, I'm unstable. I'm not bounteous, which means generous. I'm greedy. He's saying I'm not any of these things. What he's doing, he's lying. But when you hear that, you think, well, that's Macbeth. That's why Macbeth should never have been king. He's not just. He murders children in response to an insult. He's not truthful. He lies and deceives all the time. He's not measured. His ambition is vaulting. He's not stable. He's volatile and dangerous. So when Malcolm then says, actually, do you know what? I was lying. I've never broke my word. I haven't even slept with a woman. I'm not corrupt. Then Macduff is reassured. So this alliance between this good, divinely appointed heir to the throne. So Malcolm with his, status as the Prince of Cumberland, really important. That alliance between him and this tough old warrior, Macduff, gives us hope that Macbeth will be undone and that the suffering of Scotland will end. The scene ends with the really shocking news that Macduff hears. Your castle is surprised, that means attacked. Your wife and babes savagely slaughtered. Ross delivers that news to Macduff. Macduff is obviously devastated, but his determination to return to Scotland with Malcolm and to punish the monster who killed his family is redoubled. And of course, that creates a huge amount of anticipation as we head into the final act of the play, where the confrontation between Macduff, the symbol of all that is good and decent in the world, and Macbeth, who has become a symbol of the opposite by the time the play ends, that approaches. And the audience as a whole are leaning forward, wanting to see what happens next. Again, further evidence of Shakespeare's greatness as a storyteller who can hold our attention, keep us rapt, keep us enthralled, keep us interested right until the last moments of the play. That's Act 4, Scenes 2 and 3.